So here's something you might not have been aware of. DC Comics and its parent company Warner Brothers have been trying to make movies based on their most popular characters for some time now, and they haven't been doing a really good job of it. And that's really unfortunate. These are some of the greatest fictional characters of all time with the backing of a legendary film studio, and yet since 2013 they've released 5 films and only one of them was done unquestionably well. But why is that? Why have they been having such a hard time when Marvel, their main competition, is a comparatively younger studio but has released 3 or 4 times the amount of films in the same time frame, but all of them have gone to critical and commercial success? Well, everybody seems to have one particular answer. Everybody seems to know why DC characters aren't working on the big screen like Marvel characters are. But the thing about that is, they're wrong. Every single one of them. Okay, real quick, no, it's not because Disney is paying people off. Obviously, that's not the reason why. This is something I've actually been wanting to talk about for a while, this idea that the DC comic book staple of characters don't translate well to mainstream Hollywood movies the way Marvel's characters do. I was inspired to make this video now based on comments made last week by Mark Millar, famed comic book writer and aspiring movie mogul. This is a guy who, while primarily known for his independent work and his major Marvel stories, he is a big DC fan. He even worked for them for a time and penned one of the greatest Superman stories ever, Superman Red Son. He believes that the reason why DC is having a hard time adapting their heroes to live-action movies is because the DC Universe heroes aren't cinematic. Here's a quote. "With the exception of Batman," I'm not gonna do the Scottish accent, and this is paraphrased for the most part. "With the exception of Batman, DC's characters aren't based around their secret identity. They're based around their superpower. Whereas Marvel characters tend to be based more around the personality of Matt Murdock or Peter Parker or the individual X-Men. It's all about the character. Someone like Green Lantern, he has this power ring that allows him to create 3D physical manifestations and green plasma with the thoughts in his head, but he's allergic to the color yellow. How do you make a movie out of that?" He continues, "I think they're all too far away from when they were created. Something feels a little old about them. Kids look at these characters and they don't feel that cool. Superman belongs to an America that doesn't exist anymore." Now, this is an argument I've heard before. While Marvel characters are supposed to be more down to earth and have a lot of problems that we, the reader, can easily relate to, the characters of the DC Universe are more like mythical figures of legend who don't really have any problems, or if they do, it's nothing that mere mortals like us can understand. Hell, even back in 2009, Joss Whedon made a similar statement with the following: "The thing that made Marvel Comics extraordinary was that they created people. Their characters didn't live in mythical cities, they lived in New York. They absolutely were a part of the world. DC's characters, like Wonder Woman, Superman, and Green Lantern, were all very much removed from their humanity. Batman was the only character they had who had roots in pain that had the same gift that the Marvel characters had, which was the gift of humanity that we can relate to." It's a theory that irks me because it's categorically untrue. Now, what is true is that Marvel and DC characters are different. They just are. DC's characters were created during a time when comics were considered nothing more than time wasters for kids. That, coupled with the restrictions of the Comics Code Authority of the time, meant that Golden and early Silver Age heroes were really nothing more than people who stopped bad guys, ultimate paragons of good. Which was fine for the time. I mean, kids do need role models, and here were a bunch of crazy characters teaching them how to do good things. Meanwhile, when Stan Lee created the bulk of the Marvel Universe in the 70s, he wanted to create characters with traits and personalities that the audience can automatically recognize. Spider-Man was poor and unlucky, the Hulk has emotional problems, the X-Men were ostracized, you know, things like that.
I think perhaps the main reason was I can relate to him. Because he was shy, he wasn't that successful with girls, he had to worry about his family. I think most teenagers reading it thought to themselves, hey, that could be me, you know. So there certainly was that identification.
Right. Now, over time, DC did start to add some of these traits and personalities to their characters in the stories, but by this point, everybody had gotten it in their head that Marvel's characters were relatable, but DC's characters were aspirational. Spider-Man is who you are, but Superman is who you look up to be. But just because a character is aspirational doesn't mean you can't relate with them on some level. Especially with later versions of these characters, more modern versions of these characters. Green Lantern is always trying to work within the system to fix the system. Nightwing grew up from being a boy sidekick to being a man. I mean, what kid reading that isn't inspired by that? And let's not forget, one of the most famous examples is they took Green Arrow, a Robin Hood knockoff, and turned him into a prototypical social justice warrior. I mean, what's more Marvel than that? And before you say anything, no, that's not a bad thing. I like me some Green Arrow. Actually, probably should have pulled out my copy of Neil Adams' Green Lantern Green Arrow, because that was applicable, but that's on the other bookshelf. Plus, just because a character is aspirational doesn't mean they're not good material for a movie. I mean, we've all seen good to great movies based on DC characters. The first two Superman movies, Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, Wonder Woman, just last year. If you're of a certain age, Tim Burton's Batman movies. And beyond the silver screen, we got television, the George Reeves Superman show, the Adam West Batman show, the Linda Carter Wonder Woman show. Cult classics like the Flash TV show and Lois and Clark, not to mention all the stuff that the CW is currently doing right now with Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legion, all that stuff. And I guess there was Smallville, if you like that. I didn't. And that's just live action. Batman the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, Justice League, Young Justice, Static Shock, Batman Beyond, all the direct-to-DVD cartoons they've done over the past 10 years. The point is, there are countless examples of DC characters working in a medium other than comics, be it big screen movie, small screen television, video game, cartoon, what have you. So why does this idea persist that DC characters don't translate well to movies, particularly in this day and age? Well, I can tell you the reason why the current crop of movies aren't working. It's because the wrong people are making them. Focusing just with the DC cinematic universe, starting with Man of Steel, they've hired directors and writers who don't really seem to have a handle on these characters. You hired a guy who is known for making big, bloody, R-rated spectacle action movies and tasked him to do a PG-13 iconic superhero for kids. You also hired a guy who, yes, did work on great comic book movies, but was never the reason why those movies were as good as they were. In fact, every time he tried to do something on his own, it wound up being, well, Blade Trinity. But honestly, it's not even Zack Snyder's fault or David Goyer's fault. It's the people above them, the top brass at Warner Brothers, who just wanted to rush DC Comics movies out the door to try and get to Marvel without any regard for quality. Shook the bookcase just then. Man of Steel released and it was fine, and I guess fine is good enough for Warner Brothers to start a massive multi-film franchise. And again, I can't stress this enough, as soon as Batman vs. Superman was released, they went right into production on Justice League. In a rush to get things out the door and try to beat Marvel at their own game, they just wound up being the laughingstock of the entire industry. At least until The Mummy came out last year and showed you how to really screw up a cinematic universe. I keep hitting this thing. Honestly, I think the real reason why people are saying that DC's characters don't work on the big screen for one reason or another is that they're just trying to be nice. They don't want to put down the people who make these movies or the people who are in charge of making these movies. Ultimately, they could be working for them and working on one of these films, as Joss Whedon wound up doing. And that's where idiots like me come in to remind all of you guys that the characters aren't the problem and have never been the problem. If the characters were the problem, DC probably wouldn't have been making comics about them for the past 70, 80 years. Over that time frame, great writers and artists have found ways to make the unrelatable relatable. I relate more now to Superman than I ever have before, and this current line of comics has him as a father. I'm not a father, I can't relate to that, but I still relate to Superman. Again, Dick Grayson, the best example. He started as a kid in the shadow of a legend and wound up learning how to grow up and become his own man. How relatable is that? And I'm sure you guys have a whole lot of DC characters that you can relate to that I'm forgetting, but the point I'm trying to make is the characters are not the problem and have never been the problem. It's the top brass at Warner Brothers that has been and always will be the problem. Until they fully turn Jeff Johns into their version of Kevin Feige, this is gonna persist for DC and Warner Brothers. But overall, it's important for us as fans to remember that any excuse that somebody might have for why these characters aren't working on the big screen, it's important for us to remember that that's bullcrap. Let me know down below or anywhere on the internet what you guys think about DC's comics characters. Do you find them unrelatable? Do you relate to them in any way? What are some characters from DC that you relate to? Or if you have another opinion of why these characters aren't working on the big screen, let me know. I also did this episode half without a script because I forgot to finish writing it by the time I was ready to set all this up and start filming. So let me know if you caught that too. One thing I did forget to mention was that for the most part, Marvel has put almost all of their major characters on the big screen, either by themselves or through Fox or Sony or what have you, whereas DC only really got Batman and Superman on the big screen, and most recently Wonder Woman. So I think that added to the mentality that DC's characters don't work on the big screen, but as I illustrated before, that's not the reason. It's just studio nonsense. New videos every Tuesday and Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. It's Wulff Den Live. So make sure you subscribe to see all of that, like this video, and share it with a friend who wants to know the real reason why the heroes of the DC universe don't work as movies. Thank you all for watching. I will see you next time.